Now, it wasn't my first time out on a boat, but it was definitely the farthest out to sea that I'd ever been. I was a graduate student in marine biology, and I had been selected to work on a big up-and-coming project. Supposedly, we found a meeting area for whale sharks, and this was the moment we'd been building up to for quite some time. And though the water was warm from our starting location, the farther we traveled out to sea, the colder it became. We packed a lot of gear, and thankfully, the ship and crew taking us was more than accommodating for our group and the equipment. We thought the travel time would be quick, but it took some time, and before we reached the spot, some of my companions grew anxious. And I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to pass the time. One of the ship's crew members noticed what I was reading and told me that it was bad luck to read such things on the ocean. Well, I laughed it off. When we reached the location, the team and I got suited up to get into the water. We noticed that some of the ship's crew members were also getting ready to dive. They were supposed to be part of NOAH, and it made sense that they wanted some footage of this action as well. But I now know that they weren't part of the agency. We dove into the water and searched for some time, and to our dismay, nothing appeared, not a single whale shark, and I could see the disappointment in my professor's eyes. Then, the sheer dread as we all heard the sound of the ship driving off. We searched for a moment for the ship crew divers, and I'm sure we all went through the same thing, that the ship had to move just a little bit away. And the worst feeling I ever felt welled up in my stomach when we resurfaced, and the ship was nowhere in sight. The professor cursed and yelled, and then grew mad at himself. We drifted for a while, and then a storm blew in. We had all opened our small flotation devices, and we held on to each other as best as possible, but a forceful wave and strong currents separated most of us. Death is all I thought out as I struggled to remain floating and not drowning from the surrounding water. And I don't know how I survived the night, but it grew calm as the sun rose, and it rose over an island nearby. Tired and sore, I slowly floated my way to the island. My fear of the predators below me grew as the water became shallow, and I swam quickly with my last bit of energy, as I noticed some sort of reef sharks lurking 30 or 40 feet below me. I tread carefully over the shallow parts of the reef, and when I reached the beach, I only looked around for a minute before collapsing from exhaustion. When I finally woke, the sun had reached the other side of the sky, but hadn't set yet. I found a small cave before darkness set in, and it contained nothing but a few rocks and a bit of sand. It didn't take long for me to fall back to sleep, and I slept through all the sounds of the island that night. Now the next morning is when everything really started to sink in. I was alone on an unknown island. Curling up into a ball was one of my thoughts, but I pushed myself thinking of how to survive. My mind went through my little collection of knowledge gained from watching survival shows on TV. And at first I found water. It didn't take long since there was a small stream nearby which came from the interior of the jungle and out into the ocean. Fire took me the rest of the day, but I ended up starting a good-sized one as sunset drew near. The fire was near my little cave, and its warmth drifted into it just right. Though I was sad from being separated from the others, and because I didn't know their fate. I sort of enjoyed the solitude from the world, however. Although the feeling faded fast as the night set in. I'd been to an island before, and it mostly sounded normal. But there was an odd breathing sound coming loudly from the tree line. I didn't sleep much that night, because the breathing didn't stop until the sky began to lighten, and I wanted to keep my fire going. I teetered on whether I should set up camp or explore the island. At that point, I didn't know whether it was inhabited or desolate. I decided to search, taking some fresh water and hollowed coconut shells and a torch with me. And that entire day was spent walking the beach, and I soon realized I had to be the only human on the island. And that night I wished that I had stayed at my little cave. I tried to make a makeshift bed out of soggy plants, but I could still hear the breathing. And that's when I decided I needed to get off the island, even at the risk of my life. I spent the next day gathering and looking for resources to build a makeshift raft out of. The gathering drained me of my energy and hunger tugged at my stomach, so I stopped to find some food. As I came across a coconut grove, I heard movement in the shrubbery. It sounded large enough that I found a large and sturdy stick to protect myself with, and when I took a step closer to the cause of the sound, it moved closer to me. And I jumped forward and shouted while waving my stick towards it, and a creature dashed out while thrusting its tusks wildly into the air. I leapt out of its way as it ran past me and back into the forest. It looked like a boar, and it seemed fairly normal, but I noticed when it ran past me that there were several large claw scars down the boar's side, which struck me odd because boars can be a pretty large predator on an island this small. Maybe it got it while swimming in the water. Anyway, my hunger drove me back to the coconuts, but the image of the scars were burnt into my mind. The sun was setting, so I returned to my raft, only to find it completely destroyed. Crushed and splintered on the beach, then thrown about everywhere. A paranoid thought crept into my head, that I was not alone on this island. The breathing might have been someone watching me, and the thought drove me to turning my stick into a more effective weapon with a jagged rock at the end. That night I didn't sleep much, but hid in the darkness waiting for someone to walk by me. I still heard the breathing, but it loomed over the island. A very heavy, dense breathing. The next day was when I really started taking a lot of things more seriously. I gathered food, found another creek, and stored a ton of water. Then I started gathering my raft supplies and hid them rather than leave them on the beach. And after a day like that, I slept hard until I woke from the feeling of water on my feet. I had been dragged to the beach and laid near the water where the tide was rising. I ran back to where my things to find it all smashed and destroyed again. Well, shit. I lost it. I tore out my hair, I cried, and I considered suicide even. But I refrained and instead made giant signs in the sand while the sun rose. One said SOS and the other said help. After that, I made several weapons. I grabbed more food and water, then found an even better hiding place. A gap underneath a massive tree's root system. I slept through the breathing, and in the morning found my signs destroyed, and so I repaired them. I continued this for a few days until one night I woke from my sleep because of rustling plants. I saw a strange-looking foot, but it wasn't human. It was an amphibious creature with scales and claws. It was sniffing around, and a large tongue the size of a rattlesnake slithered into my hiding spot. It flapped around as if it were tasting the smell coming off of me, and then it retreated and vanished into the jungle. I slept very lightly, and I still do after seeing that. I continued to repair my signs and found different hiding spots to sleep in. One night, I woke from the sound of an airplane overhead. Luckily, I made myself a fire that evening, and I used it to light large piles of wood on fire. The smoke trailed up, and I waved my torch around like a madman. However, sheer disappointment filled me as the plane vanished into the night sky. And I like to think the thunderstorm that followed was my emotions going out into the universe. The wind raged and tore at the jungle canopy. The storm lasted into the day, and when it was done, Most of the trees had been ripped in half or uprooted. I was the unluckiest person in the world, stranded on an island and survived for what I later found out were 2 hurricanes. And this was it. My food supply would get harder if I didn't fish, and the island seemed dead and desolate, inhabited by some giant stalking lizard. And I used all the strength I could muster and build a little tiny raft. I'd rather die in the ocean than on this island. I gathered a few supplies, and taking my fire on my makeshift torches, I pushed my raft into the water under the moonlight and hopped onto it. The water was cold and dark under me, but I pushed away from the beach. I made a single oar which I used to pull myself farther out into the inky black ocean. Looking out to the vast ocean where it was hard to make out the line where the ocean and the sky met, I thought to turn back. But then I looked over my shoulder and saw the outline of a human-sized beast. And a large fin rose on its back, and it walked into the water. I could see the fin coming towards me, but it submerged, and I paddled like the island was on fire, and the island became a dot in the darkness. I continually watched the water beneath me, using the paddle in one hand and holding my makeshift weapons in the other, and I rowed until the sun came up. And sleeping in the sun seemed like a bad idea, but I had no option anyway. I woke to splashing and a missing oar. My skin was burnt red and the fin rose from the waters again while swimming towards me. However, I heard a foghorn blared out behind me, and the fin vanished beneath the waves. A large ship pulled up behind me. It was a U.S. Coast Guard ship. They threw down a ladder for me to climb up and gave me some medical attention, and I tried to explain the island monster to some of the crew members, but they just looked at me as if I were crazy. One of the medics told me I was probably just delusional. Then I remained quiet for the rest of my ride home. When I got back, I told few others about my story only to get the same reaction. Now, I didn't want people to get the impression that I'd gone completely mad, so I've kept quiet until writing this now. I got a job at a university in the Midwest, and I haven't returned to the ocean since. And well, quite honestly, I never intend to.